Once again, today we're going to look at several chapters of Deuteronomy, chapter 22 through 25. And here we have an awful lot of rules and regulations and stipulations, things that would take care of the everyday matters and concerns of the people of Israel going forward. And many of these things have very little direct pertinence for us today, just like some of the things we looked at last time. But when you begin to look at this closer, we find a lot of verses, a lot of statements are actually important, and we see connections with these statements and other portions of Scripture. So let's kind of look at these. This is interesting. For example, in chapter 22 and verse 30, a man shall not take his father's wife, so that he will not uncover his father's skirt. This is a direct, basically mention in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. Where a Christian man was doing this very thing forbidden by the law, and we talk about the discipline of that man as a result of that. Going over to chapter 23, verse 25, we read these words, "When you enter your neighbor's standing grain, then you may pluck the heads with your hand, but you shall not wield a sickle with your neighbor's standing grain." This is quoted and referenced in Matthew chapter 12, verse 1. Jesus and his disciples were going through the fields and they were plucking grain and eating them. Now there was an added feature there, that is that they were doing this on the Sabbath. And some of the Pharisees said, well, that's harvesting, and you're not allowed to harvest on the Sabbath. So there was a little more there involved, but this passage tells us that the people of Israel were allowed not to harvest somebody else's grain, but if they were hungry and they were walking through a field and the grain was ripe, they were allowed to take some food and eat it. Chapter 24, verses 1 through 3 is the basis for Jesus' teaching with the Pharisees on the matter of divorce. It's very important. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he's found some indecency in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of the house, and she leaves his house and goes and becomes another man's wife. And if the latter husband turns against her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies, who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her again to be his wife, and so forth. So the chapter goes on. Jesus enters into a debate with the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 5 and 19, dealing with this based on this verse. And the Pharisees and scribes who say, well, didn't Moses command us to get divorced? And Jesus corrects them, no, he never commanded you to get divorced, but he allowed it for the hardness of your heart. And you notice here, there was a debate among the main rabbis as to what this line of indecency meant. You could divorce her only for indecency, and one rabbi said that meant only for immorality. Another rabbi said, no, it meant for anything that he didn't like about her. Of course, rabbi was more popular among the people. But the fact of the matter was, both were wrong. In the law, if a woman committed adultery against her husband, a married couple, she was to be stoned to death. No certificate of divorce. She was to be put to death. So that doesn't fit. And indecency certainly wasn't that she burnt the beans or something along that line. So Jesus corrects them in Matthew, but this is the passage that comes to the fore. Chapter 24, verse 19, it says, and when you reap your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, for the widows, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. This has direct pertinence to chapter 2 of the book of Ruth. As Naomi and Ruth are in need of food, and by law they were allowed to go into the fields and glean from the fields, the edges and the corners and places that were left over so they could feed their families, directly in the book of Ruth. Chapter 25, verse 3, we have the limits for punishment. It says he may beat this person 40 times, but no more, 40 stripes and no more. That would be to go over even into the New Testament and the scourging of Christ himself. In chapter 25, verse 4, Paul quotes these verses twice. You shall not muzzle the ox while he's threshing, both in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 9, and in 1 Timothy 5:18. Paul quotes this in reference to paying your ministers and taking care of their needs. In chapter 25, verses 5 through 10, we have the basis for the actions of Ruth and Boaz when Boaz marries Ruth in chapter 4 of the book of Ruth. And then finally, when we come to verses 17 through 19, it looks back on the Exodus in chapter 17, verses 8 to 13, and explains why the Amalek people were judged so harshly. So these passages, while they seem to be almost throwaways to us at first, when we look at them in detail, we find they're really quite relevant and helpful to our understanding of some of the things that would happen in the past and some of the things that would happen going forward.